Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we have a quick update on yesterday's episode on the 100 kilowatt hour potential packs for Model 3 and Model Y, a new EPA range rating for the Model S, some news on Tesla and Panasonic's relationship, and on Model Y. Alright, so in yesterday's episode we spent quite a bit of time discussing a potential 100 kilowatt hour Model 3 based on some leaked images of a Model 3 in factory mode, but Elon today replied to a Teslarati article on that subject saying, quote, "No larger pack Model 3 is in development," end quote, following that up with a second tweet saying, quote, "or why," end quote. So I still think yesterday's discussion was interesting and worthwhile, but at least for now it appears that Elon is denying a possible 100 kilowatt hour pack for the Model 3. If you want to look really closely into it and splice words, technically there may be some loopholes here that could allow Elon to wiggle around this. He says, no larger pack Model 3 is in development, so perhaps the larger pack has already been developed. Or when he says larger pack, that could refer to physical size. We talked yesterday about how Elon had previously said that physical size was a constraint on battery capacity for the Model 3. So this statement doesn't technically rule out a more energy-dense battery in the same pack size. And if we think about incentives, Elon is clearly incentivized to sell the vehicles that they are actually producing today and avoid cannibalization. So in my opinion, this doesn't rule out a 100 kilowatt hour pack somewhere down the road, and it doesn't necessarily rule out something happening relatively soon. But I think we should try to at least take it at face value and shelve any hopes of a 100 kilowatt hour pack for the 3 or the Y anytime soon. If we don't, I think this will end up looking pretty reminiscent of everybody waiting for the interior refreshes, which still have not happened for the Model S and Model X. Another counterpoint that I should have brought up yesterday against a 100 kilowatt hour pack in the 3 or the Y is what one of our commenters on YouTube, Jason Scott, referred to as the opportunity cost of those batteries. We talked yesterday a lot about the incremental cost of goods sold, so for 25 kilowatt hours of additional pack capacity, maybe $2,500 or so. But that ignores batteries as a constraint. If Tesla is battery constrained, which they are likely to be for quite a long period of time, it's not just as simple as accounting for those additional costs of goods sold, because 25 kilowatt hours almost amounts to half the pack for another standard range Model 3. If we think about that from a profit perspective, that brings in a whole separate set of equations for where Tesla can get the best return on those batteries. But if we think about it from Tesla's mission perspective, when given the option, they are going to produce more vehicles. That's going to help lower emissions more. So while I do think that Tesla could do a 100 kilowatt hour pack, and eventually it will make sense to do that 100 kilowatt hour pack, and they can do it for a really low price, I would expect that those battery constraints are likely to be prohibitive for that strategy for quite some time. That being said, even without increasing battery capacity, Tesla keeps finding ways to extend range, and we see that yesterday with the Model S, which now has an EPA rating of 402 miles. Elon had talked about this coming on the earnings call. He said that the last EPA test that they did, they only didn't achieve the 400 plus mile range because the doors were left open overnight, draining some battery capacity. The EPA weirdly refuted that, and a bunch of articles then accused Elon of lying. That never made any sense because, number one, that's just a really weird lie that wouldn't really do much for Tesla in the first place, and then second, because Tesla has the vehicle logs and they can just check these things. So anyway, Elon confirmed on Twitter that all Model S cars made since late January have the 402 mile EPA range, so this increase in range, I believe from 391 previously, is a result of that retest. Anyway, the most impressive part about this is that the 402 mile range is about a 20% increase over the 2019 Model S 100D with the same battery pack capacity. So Tesla has dramatically increased efficiency, which they attribute to, in a blog post on this milestone, significant mass reduction, the new aero wheels and tires, increased drive unit efficiency, and maximizing regenerative braking. One of my favorite lines here from the blog post sums it up well. Tesla says, quote, "While each of these changes are relatively small in individual impact, our unique ability to introduce them into active manufacturing lines enables significant gains in efficiency, range, and overall value when combined," end quote. Vertical integration and a lack of horizontal boundaries between cross-functional teams, as well as the engineering talent at the top of the organization, is what makes things like this possible, and that is what Tesla means when they say our unique ability. Comparing that to a company like Nikola, for example, the difference is night and day. So congrats to Tesla for achieving that 400 milestone, and by the way, because I love talking about compound annual growth rates, if we go back to 2012, the Model S's 265 mile EPA range at that time has now seen a 5.3% compound annual growth rate over the last 8 years to this 402 mile EPA range. Next up today, we had a new Form 8K filed from Tesla with the SEC. An 8K is just a report of unscheduled material events, and today's filing is about Tesla's relationship with Panasonic. The filing discloses that on June 10th, Tesla and Panasonic entered into a new General Terms and Conditions Agreement, amending and restating their agreement from October of 2014. Unfortunately, details are pretty sparse in these filings. They just really say that the 2020 General Terms and Conditions, quote, among other things, modifies the term to expire 10 years after Panasonic achieves certain manufacturing milestones, end quote. Okay, so pretty difficult to take anything away from that without knowing those manufacturing milestones, but perhaps more interesting to us is the second part of this. Tesla and Panasonic have entered into a 2020 pricing agreement, and though that agreement happened on June 10th, the pricing agreement is effective as of April 1st, 2020, which is the beginning of Q2. That means some changes coming to Tesla's cost of goods sold on their batteries for Q2, and though we don't know necessarily what direction that means, it's likely in Tesla's favor. This agreement also, quote, sets forth the specific terms between the parties with respect to pricing, planned investments and new technology, as well as production capacity commitments by Panasonic and purchase volume commitments by Tesla over the first 2 years of the agreement, end quote. Unfortunately, we don't know what those commitments are, but we do know that Tesla and Panasonic continue to have plans to work together. Couple things worth mentioning here. We know that Tesla dropped prices in Q2 by a couple $1,000s on Model 3, $5,000 on S and X. That happened in the final week of May, so a couple weeks before this agreement was finalized, but Tesla may have known what was coming in terms of the deal, so could be related. And the other interesting thing on dates here is that this agreement was finalized on June 10th. Well, really late in the evening on June 9th was when we had the leaked email from Elon saying that it was time to get the Semi to volume production. So perhaps coincidental, but perhaps not. We know that one of the reasons the Semi has not come to production has been battery constraints. Lastly today, I wanted to give some brief thoughts on an Electrek article published today called Tesla Has Some Major Model Y Quality Issues, which unsurprisingly has been pretty controversial among people following Tesla. This one's tricky. Electrek has some photos and has heard from a few readers that they've had some quality control issues. In particular, Electrek has heard from multiple readers that they've been able to lift up the back panel of their back seat, exposing the hardware of the seat, which, while it doesn't really look great and it doesn't inspire confidence, I'm not sure it would necessarily be a safety issue, but others have had things that could be like loose seat belts or things like that. The problem here is that we don't have any data and we don't really have any way of getting data, and it's not really fair to assume widespread quality control issues based off of a handful of anecdotes. Electrek says this seems worse than in the past, but there would be a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the Model Y is ramping up more quickly than any vehicle has ever done in Tesla's past. So with more vehicles out there compressed into a shorter period of time, closer to the initial ramp up, the exact same percentage of quality control issues would seem to be a lot more, because there's probably 5 to 10 times more Model Ys out there than there were for the Model 3 at this point in the ramp up. The other major factor that should not be ignored is that since 2017, Electrek has grown significantly. So when you compare to another vehicle ramp, whether that's Model S, Model X, Model 3, you've got more Model Y vehicles out there, and you've got a higher percentage of those owners that read Electrek and have an outlet for these quality control issues to share them with. So even at the same percentage of quality issues, we should be hearing about them way, way more than we ever did with Model 3 or Model X or Model S. Now, obviously the ideal is 0. Hopefully Tesla gets these issues corrected. Hopefully these aren't too widespread. But based on Tesla's past and their customer satisfaction scores, I believe Tesla can do that in a way that will allow them to continue operating on an extremely successful level. Put simply, I'm sorry for those owners that have had those quality issues. I know that's extremely frustrating, but it's not something I find concerning for the Model Y program or for Tesla's business going forward, and I assume that any quality problems that exist, Tesla will do their best to get those straightened out. So that will do it for today. As always, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up for notifications. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast, and I'll see you tomorrow for the Wednesday, June 17th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.